The new Common Core learning standards, which set ambitious goals for what students should learn from one year to the next, are desperately needed in New York, where only about a third of high school students graduates with the math and English skills necessary to succeed at college. But the standards adopted in 2010 have had a bumpy rollout and are under siege from several constituencies. To keep the momentum going, Governor Andrew Cuomo and the Board of Regents, which oversees education in the state, needed to resist any effort to roll back the reform. They have to continue to address legitimate criticisms of the way the standards are being put into effect, while also countering the rants of union leaders and other critics who are deliberately being misled by the public. The Common Core was little noticed by the general public until August, largely because only last spring did the state shift from its old standardized tests for grades 3 through 8 to ones based on the new learning standards. Scores declined as expected. Only about 31% of the state students in those grades met or exceeded the new proficiency standard in English language arts, down from about 55% the year before. The decline in scores came as a shock to parents in affluent communities, many of whom insisted that the problem lay not in their schools, but in the new tests. The state education department deserves credit for the inventiveness it showed in creating the new tests and the curriculum materials that support the learning standards. In fact, those materials, instructional videos, teaching, training kits, and more are widely used by educators in many other states. New York, however, has failed to explain to parents and communities the aims of the Common Core, and that much more would be expected of the students, teachers, and schools than in the past. To add to the confusion, the state's 700 districts vary widely in how well they have changed to a new curriculum and trained teachers to execute it. This has created a great deal of anxiety in the teacher corps, not least because the teacher evaluating system required by state law takes student test scores into account. The current situation is made worse by infighting within the state teachers union, which has hardened its anti-Common Core position. The union complains that teachers will be unfairly judged if the new tests are included in their evaluations. But 90% of public school teachers will be evaluated entirely based on locally determined measures. Moreover, in last year's evaluations, which were based partly on the new test scores, only 1% of teachers were rated ineffective. The Regents this week released a Common Core report in which they recommended allowing teachers to challenge unfair dismissal based on student test scores in the 2012-13 and 2013-14 academic years. This provision would also give the districts time to get the learning standards in place more likely. After Governor Cuomo objected, the Regents made the proposal tentative. But the idea makes sense and would make clear to make nervous teachers, that the students recognize that the smooth adoption of the new standards will take a bit of time. The Regents reiterated that the districts would need more state money to accomplish these reforms, which will also require a larger investment in professional teacher development. Additionally, they voted to require high school teachers to pass Common Core-based graduation exams at the college level in 2022 instead of 2017 to ensure that all districts would be fully prepared. And despite widespread misconceptions, the Regents again explained that the new standards do not require school districts to increase the number of tests. the scheduled time for the federally required tests in grades 3 through 8, the Common Core report said, accounted for less than 1% of instructional time. However, local districts themselves have increased testing to comply with the provision of state law created at the request of the unions. The law requires that tests measuring growth in student learning make up 40% of an individual teacher's rating. But half of that must be derived from local measures agreed upon in collective bargaining. To comply, districts have piled on tests, many of which serve only to eat up valuable instructional time. The regents have rightly instructed the districts to cut back on these exams. The rollout of the Common Core standards, which will give students in all districts a better chance at a good education, has not been perfect. But missteps aside, the state cannot afford to let this project founder.
Who else you said to collect this project founder?
To let.
Oh, I didn't understand you.
How's it?
So.
My software's not working, so we're just gonna have to,
No.
I'm not gonna read back today, I'll have to resolve that later. One second here. Okay.
Doctor, we have spoken about intubation, is that right? Yes. In order to intubate a person, are there certain steps that are done by a physician to accomplish that procedure? Yes. Will you tell us generally what is the first fundamental step that is done? You examine the patient. Okay, and after that, you assess whether it looks like it will be an easy, straightforward intubation or whether there are anatomical reasons why it may be difficult to do. Okay, after you determine that you are going to intubate, is there any medication that is administered to the patient at that time? Yes, there usually are. And for what reason is that given? Someone is awake. If I come up with a laryngoscopy, let's say, which is this metal tool, and I ask someone to open his or her mouth, I'm going to put the metal tube in. People will not tolerate that. So we want to have them sedated so they can tolerate that. And sometimes we want to have them paralyzed so that the muscle activity isn't present, and that will give you optimal conditions under which to do the intubation. What is a gag reflex, doctor? It's a retching movement when something is put in the back of the mouth. And in order to intubate, you mentioned a laryngoscope, if I may. Is this indeed a laryngoscope? May I present this to the witness? Defendant's counsel, can we see that? The court, show it to counsel. Plaintiff's counsel, if I may. The court, is it in evidence? Plaintiff's counsel, no, I would like to offer it in evidence, Your Honor. The court, okay, go right ahead. Doctor, you mentioned earlier that a laryngoscope is used for the intubation process. Would you say that is a standard medical instrument that is utilized? Yes, it is. And now marked for identification, is that the type of instrument that is used in the performance of the intubation? Yes, it is. Plaintiff's counsel, with Your Honor's permission, may I have the witness, without putting it in my mouth, describe how it's used, if you just explain? Defendant's counsel, is this going to be offered into evidence? The court, I don't know. Plaintiff's counsel, I would like to mark it for identification. The court, it's being marked for identification. Any objection to it in evidence? Plaintiff's counsel, just a short voir dire, Your Honor. May I? The court, yes, you go ahead. Doctor, the laryngoscope that you have in your hands right now, is that the standard model used universally in the United States? This is a standard model used universally. There are other models used atypically. Doctor, how many standard models are there? What do you mean by standard? You are the one who said standard model. This is a standard model. How many standard models are there? There are 2 standard models, others that are used for special circumstances. What type was used on this patient on October 25th? Do you know? I don't. Let me look. I don't know if it's in the note, so I'll look. October 26th. 25. I don't recall seeing in the chart the mention of what type of laryngoscope is used. I don't even recall seeing any notes about the intubation in the charts. Defendant's counsel, I have no objection, Your Honor. The court, okay, in evidence. Doctor, in connection with the procedure, we have spoken many, many times about the endotracheal tube. Is an endotracheal tube used in the process of intubating a patient? Yes, it is. I ask that this, defendant's counsel, can I have a voir dire on that? You want to show this to the witness? Plaintiff's counsel, I think, Your Honor, the order of court is that it be marked for identification as an exhibit. The court, the usual procedure. Plaintiff's counsel, for identification. Doctor, do you know what endotracheal tube was used to intubate Valerie Johnson on October 25th, 1999? I know what size endotracheal tube was used. What was the size? 8. What size is that? This is a 7. This is a 7. That is not the same size that was used on her. Is that correct? Actually, it's not the same size in the charts. There is a discrepancy. Doctor, is that the same size that was used on her, yes or no? No. Do you know what brand, what type of endotracheal tube was used? No. Plaintiff's counsel, I have an objection, Your Honor. Defendant's counsel, Your Honor, may I ask a few further questions? The court, yes. Doctor, what is the difference between an 8mm and 7mm endotracheal tube? I bet you're going to say 1mm. Plaintiff's counsel, judge, objection. 1mm larger. Okay.
Okay.